day so far? Today, we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. So, reflexive and intensive pronouns. And we're going to find out what intensive pronouns are as well as reflexive pronouns, right? During the course of this lessons. And before we start with our lesson, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log in with our username as well as our password. And then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 6. Once you've done that, you're going to scroll down up until you get to your chapter. So up until we get to the chapter, right? And the chapter is reflexive and intensive pronouns. So we're going to be focusing on reflexive and intensive pronouns. So there's going to be a few lessons that we're going to be doing under the chapter of reflexive and intensive pronouns. So once again, our chapter is reflexive and intensive pronouns. Our subject is English language arts, grade 6. And the lessons that we are focusing on today is to choose between personal, which is personal pronouns, and reflexive pronouns, and to use reflexive pronouns. And is the pronoun reflexive or intensive? So that is going to be our focus lessons for today and the chapter of reflexive and intensive pronouns. And we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So reflexive pronouns, right, are pronouns that end either in self or in selves, right? And we will only know when it either ends in self or selves based on if it's singular or if it's plural, right? So if it is reflexive pronouns, right, self, if it refers to it being singular, right, and then we will use words like self, like myself, itself, himself, herself, right? It refers to one person or thing. And then when we use the word selves, then we are referring to it being plural, right? Themselves, ourselves, right? Because that refers to more than one person. So it becomes plural. And more, we helped ourselves to some more soup. This is examples, right? We helped ourselves to some more soup. And if we identify the if we identify our what our reflexive pronoun is, then we will say it is ourselves. And remember our reflexive pronoun, it needs to basically refer back, or it needs to link with what our pronoun is. So ourselves needs to link back with the subject, which is we, the subject pronoun we, right? So the subject in the sentence is we, and the reflexive pronoun is ourselves. So if we say we, then we use ourselves. So we helped ourselves to some more soup. We helped ourselves to some more soup. After the guests left, Amy made herself a cup of tea. So after the guests left, Amy made herself a cup of tea. So which means that in this case, Amy, right? The pronoun Amy is basically a noun, right? And she is the subject. But now, if we change that noun into a pronoun, we can say she. So we can say she. So after the guests left, she, which is Amy, made herself a cup of tea. So if we use she, then we definitely use herself. If we use he, then it is himself. So in this case, it says the subject of the clause in which the pronoun appears is Amy, which is Amy, and Amy can be called she, which we did, so we use herself. All right, and we said our lessons are on aplusstudents.ca. So we're going to now go deeper into what a reflexive pronoun, intensive pronoun, or basically a pronoun is. So now we're going to choose between a personal and reflexive pronoun. So we need to select the base pronoun to complete the sentence. And before we do so, right? A reflexive pronoun. Reflexive pronouns are pronouns that end in self or selves, like we said earlier on. And the subject, if we have a subject for our if we have a singular subject, let's put it like this. If we have a singular, right, which is I, and then our reflexive pronoun is myself. If we have a singular pronoun, which is you, then it's you, yourself. If we have a singular subject, she, then it's herself. Singular subject, he, then it's himself. And singular subject, it, then it's itself. And then if we have a plural subject referring to more than one person or thing, then we can say for our plural subject. So we, then our reflexive pronoun is ourselves. Our plural subject is you, which is yourselves. And our plural subject is they, which is themselves. And these are called reflexive pronouns. And reflexive pronouns that ends in self or selves. self referring to it being singular, and selves referring to plural. So a reflexive pronoun is used to refer back to the subject. So for example, if we say ourselves, then it needs to link with we, because we go back to our pronoun, which is we, or subject, which is we. So we helped ourselves to soup, which means that the subject is we, so use ourselves. And then after the guest left, Amy made herself a cup of tea. And the subject of that clause in which the pronoun appears is Amy, which means that we change Amy into she, and then she links with herself. So a reflexive pronoun, right, can only be used to refer to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears. Refer to someone or some to refer to someone else or something else, a personal pronoun like me, you, him, her, it, us, or them should be used instead. To refer to someone else, right, or something else, then a personal pronoun like me, you, him, her, it, us, or them should be used instead. So reflexive pronoun, it can only be used to refer to the subject of the sentence or clause in which it refers or appears, right? And to refer to someone else or something else, we use a personal pronoun. So if you are referring to someone else, then we say you, him, her, it, they, then that is used, right? Instead. That is a pronouns. It's referring to someone else. But a reflexive pronoun, right, it refers to the subject. It refers to Amy, for example, and herself. It refers to Jack and himself. And we make an example of the personal pronouns where we say Jake wrote a note for himself, right? So if Jake writes a note for himself, right, then it means that he is actually referring it back to himself. So that is a reflexive pronoun. It is referred to him. It goes back to himself, right? Who is the subject. But if we say Jake wrote a note for him, which refers to someone else, then that is a personal pronoun. So, like we say, we have our reflexive pronouns And then we have our personal pronouns. Reflexive pronouns refers back to the subject, so which means that it's like saying, writing it to himself, herself, itself, right? Yourself, referring it back to, basically referring it back to yourself. But if you are referring it to someone else or writing it for someone else or doing it for someone else, then that is a personal pronoun, right? Because we now say him, her, it, them, right? That is what we would now make mention of. So we need to select the best pronoun to complete the sentence. Do you usually correspond with by phone or email? So do you usually correspond maybe with him by phone, text, or email? So you can either say yeah by her, with him, because you're referring to someone else. So that is personal pronoun, right? You're referring it to someone else because we are asking, do you respond to someone else? So it's either to her or do you usually respond to him by phone or text? So we don't say, do you usually respond to herself, himself, right? Because if you are responding to someone or corresponding with someone on the phone, then you're not corresponding with yourself, right? You're corresponding with someone else. So you then say you use the personal pronoun either to refer to to someone else, which is to him, to her, to them, and so on, right? We need to select the best pronoun to complete the sentence. He impressed with his knowledge of Greek myths and legends. So we can maybe say he impressed himself. Because if he is the subject, right? If he is the subject, then you can maybe say he impressed himself with his knowledge of Greek myths and legends, which means that he's shocked at himself. So, which means that the subject is he and our reflexive pronoun is himself. So, he impressed himself with his knowledge of Greek myths and legend, which means that he refers back to the pronoun which is he or the subject that is he. Oh, oh yeah, they're actually saying he impressed me. So which means that it is a personal pronoun. Mean he impressed someone else, not himself. So when we by number three, sorry, it says best pronoun to complete the sentence. She summoned to the conference room for an emergency meeting with the president of the company. So she summoned me. She summoned me to the conference room for an emergency meeting with the president of the company. You can even say she summoned him. She summoned her. She summoned them because that is all personal pronouns that they are making use of. Right? Now let's go to our test where we are going to choose between either a personal pronoun or a reflexive pronoun. So you're going to select the best pronoun to complete the sentence. This weekend, I am dedicating myself to taking care of the chores that have piled up, or I'm dedicating me to taking care of the chores that have piled up. So we need to either choose the word myself, which is option one, or me, which is option two. So this weekend, I am dedicating myself to taking care of the chores that I've piled up, or I'm dedicating me to taking care of the chores that have piled up. So who's basically going to do the chores that has piled up? Myself, which is I, or me. And if we choose the correct one, we can say I am dedicating myself, right? Because myself refers to, it's a reflexive pronoun, which refers to the subject I. So myself is correct. Option 1 is correct. So well done, guys. I can't wait to acquaint myself with all that the city has to offer, or I can't wait to acquaint me with all that the city has to offer. So the subject is I. So I can't wait to acquaint myself with all that the city has to offer, or I can't wait to acquaint me with all that the city has to offer. So is it option 1, which is myself, acquainting myself, or acquainting me? Option 2, either option 1 or option 2. So then we can say that subject is I, right? So if you're referring it to yourself, then you can say that I can't wait to acquaint myself with all that the city has to offer. So well done. In the station, a lost tourist asked me for directions to the flea market, or the lost tourist asked myself for directions to the flea market. So is it me, which is option 1, or myself? So basically, this will be the personal pronoun because the tourist asked me for directions, right? Remember, if it says in the subway station a lost tourist, right? So the tourist, he asked me for directions, which means that he came up to, right, for directions to the flea market. Because remember, our when we use reflexive pronouns, which is myself, ourselves, then it means that we need to this our subject needs to link with either whatever the reflexive pronoun is. So tourist came to ask me for direction, right? And that is correct. So well done. Me is correct. Wrap around spiders hide during the day by wrapping themselves around twigs or wrapping yourself around twigs. So wrap around spiders. They hide during the day by wrapping themselves around twigs or wrapping yourselves around twigs. And if we refer to the wraparound spiders, we can say they hide during the day. So they hide during the day, which means that they refers to the reflexive pronoun of themselves, right? So the wraparound spiders, they hide during the day by wrapping themselves around twigs. So yes, themselves is correct. Well done. And to observe the poor working conditions firsthand, the reporter disguised herself or myself as one of the factory workers. So, to observe the poor working conditions firsthand, the reporter disguised herself as one of the factory workers, or the reporter disguised myself, the factory workers. And remember, our reflexive pronoun needs to link back to what the subject is. And in this case, the subject is the reporter, which can either be she disguised herself, right? And she refers back to the reflexive pronoun as herself. Yes, that is correct. Herself. Because remember, we need to basically identify whatever the subject is first. So if it is a noun, which is like the reporter, then you can basically try and find what the pronoun is on, and the pronoun of this noun can either be him, her, or so on. In this case, it is her because, or she, because we are referring to herself, right? So well done. Herself is correct. All right. Now we're going on to the next lesson, which is to use reflexive pronouns. And remember, reflexive pronouns, it's where we use self, right? Or selves. And we use the pronoun self to refer to a singular subject. And we use the pronoun selves, right? When we refer to a plural subject, right? And it says that reflexive pronouns are pronouns that end in self or selves. Self, singular, selves, plural, right? So if our subject is I, if our subject is I, right, then the reflexive pronoun will be myself. So myself is referring back to I, which is the subject, right? Or I, which is the subject, refers to myself, which is the reflexive pronoun. If the subject is you, and remember, you can be both singular and you can be plural, right? So you, as in the singular form of singular subject, you refers to the reflexive pronoun, which is yourself. She, which is the singular subject, refers to herself. And we made an example of the reporter. And then we basically change that noun into the pronoun, which is she. And then we get our reflexive pronoun, which is herself. Then he, which is the singular subject, refers to himself as the reflexive pronoun within a sentence. And it, as a singular subject, refers to itself as itself in the reflexive pronoun. And that is when we use self. Now, when we use selves, right, VES, we refer to it as in a plural form. So plural subject, right, would be maybe we, and we refer to the reflexive pronoun as ourselves. You, and here we see the you as in the plural form. The plural subject, you, is yourselves. It's almost like there's a group of learners or kids who are standing on the one side and you are pointing to them, right? So you can maybe like say you, and you're referring to them as the you. That is when you say you for more than one person or yourselves as more than one person. And then they, which is the plural subject referring to the reflexive pronoun, which is themselves, right? And as a reflexive pronoun is used to refer back. It refers back to the subject, meaning if we use ourselves as the reflexive pronoun, then it needs to refer back to the subject we. If we make use of the reflexive pronoun, which is herself, and then it needs to refer back to she, right? So a reflexive pronoun is used to refer back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears. And it needs to agree with the subject. Ourselves needs to agree with we. Themselves needs to agree with they. Itself needs to agree with it. Herself needs to agree with she. Himself cannot refer to you. You understand? So himself to he, for example. And an example is we helped ourselves to some more soup. So ourselves refers back to our subject, which is we, right? So the subject is we, so we use the reflexive pronoun ourselves. And after the guests left, Amy made herself a cup of tea, right? So in this case here, we have the noun, which is Amy. But Amy is the pronoun also of she, right? So then if we maybe use this word or change this word into she now, then we can say after the guest left, she made herself a cup of tea. So herself refers to she, which is Amy, right? So Amy is called she, which is the pronoun, and that is basically referring back to herself or herself referring back to Amy, which is she, right? And a reflexive pronoun can only be used to refer to the subject. It only refers to the subject. Like I say, if the subject is her, she, sorry, then we use her. If the subject is he, we use himself. If the subject is it, we use itself. It needs to refer back to the subject. It can only refer back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears, right? If you want to refer to someone else, if you're doing something for someone else, right, then we use a personal pronoun. Or, like we said, that the tourist, right, was talking to someone. If the tourist or someone talks to you, then it means that we use a personal pronoun because someone else came to speak to you. Or if you make mention of someone else, if you are writing a note to your friend, then it means that you're writing it to her or you're writing it to him, right? So then we don't use the word myself, herself, itself, right? We use the personal pronoun that either refers to someone else, right? But the reflexive pronoun, it only refers to the subject, which is I, she, he, it, them, you, and so on. All right, so we're going to do one activity, then we do the test. So he describes as someone who isn't afraid to try new things. What is the reflexive pronoun within that sentence? He describes who as someone who isn't afraid to try new things. The reflexive pronoun. He describes. Does he describe myself as someone who isn't afraid to try new things? Yourself, herself, himself, or itself as someone who isn't afraid to try new things? And if we look at the subject that it needs to refer back to, it needs to refer back to the subject, which is he. So, what is the reflexive pronoun that we are going to identify? Is it myself, yourself, herself, himself, or itself? All right, so if we choose the correct one, we can then say, oopsie, we can say himself. Why is my thing not working? Let's choose. Then we choose himself. So he describes himself. Let me use my mouse. He describes himself. Oopsie. As someone who isn't afraid to try new things. So himself is being used, right? Because it refers back to the subject, which is he. All right, let's go to our test, right? So we need to complete the sentence with a pronoun that refers back to the subject in bold, right? So the pronoun, which means that we are going to choose the reflexive pronoun. When she goes to outdoor events in the winter, she generally wraps. She actually wraps, is it herself in scarves and blankets or himself in, in scarves and blankets? So when she goes to events in the winter, she generally wraps herself in scarves and blankets or himself in scarves and blankets. Which one is the correct one? Option one, which is herself, because we refer back to herself, or the subject, which is she, or himself, which refers back to the subject she. All right, so we'll choose the first option because herself refers back to the subject, which is she. So well done. At the news conference yesterday, he proclaimed himself or herself the greatest player in the history of basketball. So he, which is the subject, proclaimed himself or herself as the greatest player in the history of basketball. All right, so if we, our reflexive pronoun that basically refers back to our subject in bold, which is he, then we'll choose option one because himself refers back to the subject, which is he. So great job. Himself is great. And then as I waited in the car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror and realized that I had forgotten to brush my hair, or I caught a glimpse of me in the rearview mirror and realized that I had forgotten to brush my hair. So I caught myself or I caught me. So the reflexive pronoun needs to refer back to the subject, which is I. And then we are going to choose. So myself refers back to the subject is I. So great job, guys. Well done. So I is correct. All right. So now we're going to say is the pronoun is the pronoun reflexive, intensive, right? So we already said what reflexive pronouns is, right? It's where reflexive pronouns in self, right, which is either herself, himself, itself, or in selves, depending on the singular or plural form, right? And that needs to refer back to the subject, right? So in this case, it says Sarah, right? So Sarah, did Sarah save any of the cookies for herself? Which means that Sarah is maybe we can say she, right? So did she save any cookies for herself? So she refers to herself. So the reflexive pronoun herself refers back to the subject, which is Sarah, which can also be she, right? And it is the object of the preposition for, because it's referring to herself. It's for herself, not for someone else. So that is a reflexive pronoun. And then we have an intensive pronoun, and that emphasizes or intensifies the noun or pronoun they refer to. They refer to, right? So they can refer to any pronoun within the sentence, not just the subject. So any noun that within or pronoun that was within the sentence, the intensive pronoun basically can refer to that specific. It does not just have to refer to the subject, right? The reflexive pronoun only refers to the subject, but intensive pronoun can emphasize or intensify any noun or pronoun that they want to refer to within a sentence. And intensive pronoun are used to emphasize for emphasis only, so they are not objects of verbs or prepositions, right? So, for example, no one else was home, so I brought in the groceries myself, right? Which means that the intensive pronoun myself emphasizes the pronoun I, right? And then after waiting in line all afternoon, we were finally able to meet the queen herself, right? Which means that the intensive pronoun herself emphasizes the queen, right? So we are putting emphasis on the queen, or we're putting emphasis on myself, right? And we're referring it back to, you see, it's not even just the subject that it refers to the noun, right? But it intensifies, or it basically emphasizes the noun itself, right? So if we look at this one sentence, it says the president found the company's hiring process too slow. So on Monday, she appointed a new assistant herself, right? So if she, instead of just saying that, instead of just referring it to herself, right? She is emphasizing that she's going to do it herself, right? So that is an intensive pronoun. And then you yourself, you see, this is not emphasizing about you, right? So you yourself say that education is one of the most important things, right, in your life. That is an intensive pronoun, right? Even here, Mr. Sherman taught me how to use the power drill, and I now can drill holes myself, right? Emphasizing that I can also do this, right? So let us quickly do a test and at least do like one or two just to see that we can basically identify between reflexive and intensive pronouns. So we need to see if this is either reflexive or intensive. They say we were fortunate enough to meet the governor himself at the town hall meeting. A reflexive pronoun, or is that intensive noun? It's like emphasizing that y'all met the governor. And if we select the correct one, we will say intensive, right? Because it says we were fortunate enough to meet the governor himself, right? Because this now basically refers to the governor, me. So this is an intensive pronoun. Let's do one more. The West African savanna frog is able to conceal itself in ant colonies thanks to chemicals that coat its skin. So is this an intensive pronoun or do you think this is a reflexive pronoun? It's referring to the West African savanna frog is able to conceal itself in ant colonies thanks to chemicals coat its skin. So this now refers back to the subject, which is the West African savanna frog. So we can say this is I think it's a reflexive. Yes, because it refers back to the subject, which is the African frog. All right, so grade 6, thank you very much for joining our class. This is now the end of our lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. And we said reflexive pronouns is where we use self, we use selves. We use self to refer to a singular subject, and we use selves to refer to a plural subject. And our reflexive pronoun needs to refer back to the subject, right? That it is basically, that we are basically talking about, right, within our sentence. And then we also spoke about intensive pronouns, and the intensive pronoun, it is only used for emphasis, right? On certain, emphasis on a specific noun within a sentence, not just the subject itself. So thank you very much for joining the class, and I really hope you're going to have a great day further. Goodbye.